So this is what we're talking about, huh? The idea of a sound type being added to Pokemon has always been one of the most popular concepts for a new Pokemon type, and while there's plenty of videos out there coming up with how exactly it works as a new type, I've always been more interested in Sound's current situation of being a random battle mechanic that manages to feel so much like a new Pokemon type in the making, like a kinda type-adjacent mechanic. That's why Sound was adjacent to the other Pokemon types at the start. It was a funny joke. Anyway, I want to try to find more Pokemon mechanics that, with a little tweaking, could become a pseudo-type, like Sound is. But we should probably try to figure out what makes Sound so special in the first place. So what's the deal with Sound in Pokemon? And what makes it what I'm now arbitrarily deciding to call a pseudo-type? First and foremost, Sound is just a solid idea for a Pokemon type already. There's been Pokemon designs and moves built around the identity of Sound since Generation 1, and with the introduction of abilities in Gen 3, we got the obviously Sound-themed Whismur line and their signature ability, Soundproof, which introduced Sound as a battle mechanic. As if there wouldn't already be enough music or singing-themed Pokemon designs, now a move can have the "is sound-based" label tacked onto it, and from there you can get wacky with a lot of abilities, items, and even entire Pokemon designed around these sound moves. This has meant that Sound at times feels like the offensive half of a full Pokemon type without actually being a proper type. And again, with such a strong niche of obviously Sound-themed Pokemon designs, it becomes pretty clear why Sound has such a strong history of being a fan-favorite new type. Having said all that, I love that Sound isn't a Pokemon type. It's just a niche battle mechanic that strikes the ever-so-delicate balance of feeling like it'd be perfect as a new Pokemon type without actually being one. And I want more! Give me more! Give me The obvious starting point for this investigation is to look into the mechanic that is the most similar to Sound already: Contact. Contact shares the same core starting point as Sound does because it's also an extra property tacked onto several Pokemon moves, and thus has extra abilities and items built around it. In fact, it has significantly more than Sound does. So much so that I think that's the issue, or well, one of the issues at least. Contact doesn't feel like a pseudo-type currently because it isn't as rare as an actual type. There's 18 Pokemon types, so roughly 1/18 of attacks should be a certain type. Sound is rare enough to kind of feel like this, but Contact takes up nearly 1/3 of all total moves, which just makes it feel like one of the move categories instead, because it basically is just the physical move category. I think the only reason the mechanic was even introduced is because before the physical special split of Generation 4, being physical depended on the type of move rather than the move itself. So Contact served as a move-specific qualifier to say, yeah, fighting your opponent does make physical contact with them no matter what magical elements are coursing through your teeth. And that means Contact doesn't particularly excel at feeling like a good thematic either. I mean, I can't exactly imagine very many Contact-themed Pokemon concepts. That'd be weird. But more importantly, you could easily change every battle mechanic that depends on a move making contact into just if the move is physical and still have little to no issues. So what if that's exactly what we did? What if we cut out like half of the current Contact stuff and move them into the broader physical move category, leaving us with a smaller selection of moves that would fit into a more appealing theme? That would be the fighting type. So we can't do that perfectly, but I still want to try to make this work because conceptually, Contact being primarily based around physical attacks seems like the perfect balance to Sound being primarily based around special attacks. But I'll be honest, I could really only think of one option. We split Contact moves into Impact and Sharp moves. Not only does this help change the sterile, analytical term Contact into one of our more battle-ready categories, it also helps by narrowing the scope down for each group. So Impact would only be moves that are specifically hard-hitting, bludgeoning-style attacks like Tackle or Giga Impact. That'd leave all the Sharp Contact moves like Cut. And I think we'd still be able to keep most contact mechanics around without having to move all of them over to the physical category. Most of the counter-attacking mechanics, like Spiky Shield, Rocky Helmet, or Rough Skin, I think make more sense to only apply to impact moves, so those can stay around, but more abstract effects like Wandering Spirit, Mummy, Cute Charm, those can either, I guess, apply to sharp moves, or just apply to all physical moves. Though, to make up for that, I could see new abilities getting bonus effects for impact, like making the Rockhead ability boost the damage of impact attacks, or Shell Armor making you take less damage from impact attacks. As for Sharp, there's literally a Sharpness ability that was recently introduced, which kinda did my job for me, but I'd say you could add some new mechanics like having Sharp attacks ignore Reflect, or having them cut through sticky webs, stuff like that. Basically, the only real trouble with making Impact and/or Sharp into pseudo-types like this is that it doesn't really solve the issue of a solid theme. I mean, I can think of at least a few more Pokemon that better fit an Impact theming than what is essentially Touch, but it doesn't exactly feel like a pseudo-type grouping in the same way Sound does. Impact and Sharp still feel like, yeah, that's an attribute of an attack, but not an elemental type for a Pokemon. So maybe we can just give up on a contact pseudo-type and try to find some other mechanic out there that is already a good theme for designs. At first, it doesn't seem like food is anywhere close to Sound in terms of being a pseudo-type. Sure, there's a lot of food-themed Pokemon already, but that just means that food is a solid type idea. To be a real pseudo-type, we need mechanics, which there's no food-themed battle mechanics, right? Well, there is food, specifically berries, and berries have a lot of mechanics built around them. There's quite a few attacks that involve berries, most of which just involve stealing your opponent's berries, but there are attacks like Belch, which force your Pokemon to throw up the berry they just ate. So, that's a bit of variety. There's more variety with berry-based abilities, though. Boosting their effects, replenishing them, preventing their use. There's just not any items based around berries because they are items. Though all that doesn't really matter because we're not trying to pitch a berry pseudo-type here. Food is the strong theme. The issue is that food Pokemon, and thus the identity of food as a potential Pokemon type, is entirely disconnected from berries as a mechanic. Squirrels are more heavily associated with the berries currently. And while I could just say some moves count as food-based moves now and build a bunch of new stuff around that, ignoring berries entirely, I do want to try to tie in the existing mechanics as much as possible. So how about this? Sound's identity as a pseudo-type comes from it being a mechanic built into attacks that other elements of the game interact with to form basically the offensive traits of a Pokemon type. So let's make food a mechanic that's built into items that other elements of the game interact with to form the defensive traits of a Pokemon type. My idea is basically to give some moves and abilities special interactions with Pokemon who are holding food. That can be berries, leftovers, or rare candies if you want to hold those for some reason. Basically just holding food counts as the Pokemon essentially being food type defensively. Just like how giving your Pokemon a leaf makes it grass type. From there, we can have attacks like Lick and Bite deal more damage against Pokemon holding food. Garganacl's Salt Cure attack could heal Pokemon over time rather than damaging them because salt would make the food tastier, and food-themed moves like Decorate would be stronger if the user is holding food, raising your stats more than if you weren't. And obviously, abilities like Gluttony would make you deal more damage to Pokemon holding food as well. Now, there is one teensy tiny issue with this idea. This is still entirely unrelated to the existing food-themed Pokemon. Of course, adding new moves that take advantage of this mechanic, like a new stat-boosting move called Season or Salt Shaker that would boost stats more if the target is holding food, and then giving those food moves to the food Pokemon would help associate the pseudo-type with those Pokemon more. But another option is to have some abilities make Pokemon act like they're always holding food, regardless of what their current held item actually is, making them effectively part food type. You could just have a simple ability like Tasty or something like that that says moves and abilities that rely on a Pokemon holding food will always act like this Pokemon is holding food. I'm sure they'd word it better than that, but you get it. Then you just retroactively give the Tasty ability to as many food-themed Pokemon as you can. Or you can just add that trait onto already existing abilities like Well-Baked Body, the signature ability of Bread Loaf Dog. Or Aroma Veil, an ability that is also pretty exclusive to food Pokemon, including Bread Loaf Dog again. With all that said, just based on the fact that I had significantly more and significantly cooler ideas for a food pseudo-type than a contact one, I think it's safe to assume that the correct approach to making an interesting pseudo-type isn't to go after mechanics, it's to go after thematics. Which is lucky for me because, I'll be honest here, I couldn't find a single other major battle mechanic that I thought would make a good pseudo-type, but there's enough small mechanics throughout Pokemon battles already, I just need one solid Pokemon type idea to build around. I need—
Wait! If that was you on the phone and you on the bus, then who was flickering the lights?
If you weren't around way back in the day when old people used to actually be young, Light type was the Pokemon type. Everyone thought Light was an obvious choice as a counter to Dark type. That was before Fairy type existed and what people actually thought Fairy type would be before it was fully revealed. Of course, in many ways, the idea of a full-on Light type nowadays wouldn't really work because it's basically covered by the Fairy type alongside Electric, Fire, and sometimes even Psychic. But having Light be a pseudo-type bypasses that issue entirely. In fact, the fact that so many existing types could feasibly fit the theme of Light is arguably a benefit to our goal of being a good pseudo-type, because that means we aren't just reinventing the fighting type or something stupid like that. And while I tried to avoid doing this with food, Light feels far more perfect for just following the same blueprint as Sound by making Light be a property that's just tacked on to several moves. There are already plenty of moves that you could easily justify being Light type, like Flash, Solar Beam, Flash Cannon, Moonlight, Morning Sun. I mean, just look at Necrozma's moveset and I'm sure you can pick out plenty of good options. Okay, but making a bunch of moves descriptions longer doesn't exactly create a pseudo-type. And even if we add in some physical attacks as Light moves, we're still way too similar to Sound to be very interesting. But thankfully, I'm saying a super clever transition into the next topic, Sunny Day. Sunny Day would obviously be another light-based move on its own, but more importantly, it creates the harsh sunlight weather condition, and I think having harsh sunlight be a light-based weather could be a neat way to set it apart from Sound. You could make all light moves do more damage or have higher accuracy while in the sun, and then I guess you should probably drop the damage boost that fire-type moves receive in the light, or keep that around and make fire-type light moves absolutely busted. I don't care, I'm not the balance team. Then you just have to give the Drought ability to more Pokemon than just Torkoal and Groudon, and that'll be a good gateway into theming Pokemon around the light pseudo-type. You can also adjust some old abilities like Chlorophyll or Solar Power to apply to light moves. Or just add brand new abilities that can like make you immune to light moves, make your light attacks stronger, give your light moves priority, all that good stuff. And item-wise, you can obviously add new ones that play around light, but considering Sound only has one item based on it, I think just retrofitting some old items to play with light moves could work just as well. For example, the black glasses could make you immune to light moves, or if that's too busted for a held item, just make you resist light moves. The light ball could boost the power of light-based moves a bit, either just for Pikachu, like its current effect, or for any Pokemon to give it an actual use outside of Pikachu. Or, well, actually, the Bright Powder and Zoom Lens could reasonably boost light-based attack power too, so Pikachu can keep its dumb ball to itself. And despite having light in the name, I think light clay should not and never will have any effect on light-based moves for as long as I breathe. Now, I'll admit, this still might be too similar to how sound works, plus my ideas for a contact pseudo-type were basically just a physical sound pseudo-type, so to be perfectly honest, this was probably not that valuable to anyone. Except food. An item-based pseudo-type that's the defensive half of a Pokemon type rather than the offensive half, that was pretty cool, right? Gotta give me that one. But the point is, I think the idea of having more pseudo-types like sound is cool, and I think there's some interesting potential in trying to do more with that, in making that idea of pseudo-types more of an official category of battle mechanics, rather than it just being sound randomly there for no reason. And I feel like both light and food work well for that. Not contact, that one sucked. Of course, Pokemon doesn't really need more mechanics. It's plenty complicated and deep as is, but these pseudo-types could be a cool way to be like, yeah, these are popular themes/ideas that a lot of Pokemon designs follow, so here's a way to acknowledge that in battles without having to make a full new Pokemon type. It could be like the Mii costumes of Pokemon types. Wait, that didn't really go well for Smash, did it?